Are you wondering which is the best 3D printed dungeon set that you can get into? If you're just starting now into 3D printing and if you're now exploring the different 3D printed options, hopefully this will be a guide that will help you. And right off the bat, I'm going to tell you it really depends on what your priorities are in terms of which is going to be the best system for you. But hopefully I'll be able to outline the characteristics of these 5 different systems that I have before you, and then you can make your own choice in terms of which one's going to work out the best for you. And obviously these aren't the only 5. There are a lot of other ones that are out there, but these are some of the more popular ones, and I wanted to have some breadth and variety to be able to show you as well in terms of what the options are. So let's go ahead and dive in. So the first one is going to be Devin Jones's OpenForge, and this is available for free. So out of all of the 5 different systems that we're going to take a look at today, OpenForge is the most affordable because every piece is free. And also it has the most variety. Because it's free and because he's pumping out all kinds of different things on here, there are tons of different files that you can get. And other people are mixing them up and making their own. So if you are looking for the most variety and at the most affordable price for free, then OpenForge is the system that you want to get. I will say he has so many pieces that it can be a little confusing to know what you should be getting. And even to get through all of the pieces that he has available can be a little bit of a chore. But he does have a tutorial where he has suggestions for what pieces to make and how many of them and what materials that you're going to need and how many magnets too. And so this is a good tutorial, and you can just click on these and figure out what kind of pieces that you want. So if you're just beginning and you're limited with your budget, I think OpenForge is a really good system that you can try out and see how much you like it since everything is free. Next up is Dragonlock, and their dungeon starter is actually $10, which is pretty good, and that will give you all of these basic starter pieces that you'll need to build a dungeon. So that's pretty good. Now they do have a free starter set, a sampler right here, that you can download and try out first. It's fairly limited because it's only a straight wall and a floor tile with some clips. So you're not getting any corners or anything like that. But you can at least print it out and see if it's something that you like before investing in it. But they do have a good amount of variety. They also have this Caverns set, which I also have as well. And that's really cool too. So they do have quite a bit of variety, and I do like the style of their terrain. And just like OpenForge and Printable Scenery, they do have separate walls that you can attach to the edge so that you're not taking up an extra inch of space with those walls. So that's something to consider as well. Next up is Printable Scenery. And they have this base pack, which is free. It takes a while to hunt through, but look at the links below and I'll provide a link to this base pack. And that's free, and this is what I printed out. They have a different base pack that is available on Thingiverse for free. And I don't know why they have 2 different base packs, but you're going to get a little bit more variety on the floor. You don't get the portcullis in this set, but you can combine these 2 sets and basically try it out. But Printable Scenery's Rampage system is going to cost you the most. After the free trial packs, I would say you're going to spend about $25 to get the base doors that you need, the walls, the floors, and so it's going to be the most expensive. But they do have a lot of variety as well. And I would suggest going with the low walls. If I were to do it, I would do it with the lower walls just because I think the high walls hides the figures too much. But it gives you a ton of variety, more so than Dragonlock. So if you want a lot of diversity in your set, then I would go with Printable Scenery. I mean, look at this. There's over 20 pages of different items that you can get. So definitely consider this. True Tiles also provides you with a sample pack, and that's what I printed out. But their other sets are pretty affordable. I think their base dungeon set is only $9, so that's going to be fairly inexpensive. And again, you print these off and you can glue them onto these tiles where you can use the open lock clip system. And they have different varieties. Oh look, they actually do have single squares here, which I didn't know that, but you'll probably want to grab this set too to just create more versatility. Here is the Dragon's Rest. And what's unusual about this is you can't just purchase the dungeon. But in order to get the dungeon set, you have to become a Patreon supporter, which at the base level is $6. Even though you have to be a patron, at $6, you're getting more for that $6 than you are, especially for Printable Scenery, which will cost you $25 or even more to get as much as you're going to get here from Dragon's Rest. Also, for being a patron, you're going to gain access to this library, which I printed out some of these books and desks for scenery. And you're also going to gain access to this as well. And as a patron, you'll receive a lot more items. Now, one of the things that I will say, especially for OpenForge, even though everything is free, I would highly suggest that you become a patron of his, or at least throw some money his way or tip him, because Devin Jones, I know, does a lot of work in providing these files for free to the community. So I would definitely try to support him. So that's the general overview over the 5 systems. Now we'll get a little bit more into some of the other categories as comparison. So one of the first things that you have to deal with when creating a 3D dungeon is the wall problem. As you can see here from this model from OpenForge, when you place a physical wall, it's going to take up part of the square to make it where you can't put a miniature here. Wherever there's a wall, this is just a ½ inch, and that's not big enough to be a usable space. And so at any time you put any kind of wall or structure, it renders this space ineffective. And so really, this room here, you have 4 by 3. These 12 squares are the only usable squares. And so when you're creating a room, you need to add in an inch across all of the borders wherever you have a wall. Now that necessarily isn't a problem, so let's take a look at this map. Here on this map, you can see that there are spots where the wall is taking up a whole square, and these squares here are 5 feet, right? And so here, that's not a problem in recreating this. Anywhere where there's just nothing on the other side of the wall, that's not going to be a problem to create sort of dead space around the area. So any of these spaces that's taking up a complete square, it's not going to be an issue. But what about these spots here, like these walls that are really thin, where technically it's not really taking up any space and a miniature can go into these spaces freely? You can't really recreate this map. You're going to have to fudge by adding in squares where there aren't any, and you will disrupt the grid system that is replicated here. So one of the ways that makers have tried to mitigate that is to offset the wall so that it clips on to the edge. But again, then it shifts the grid over and you have to accommodate this ½ inch width of the wall with the rest of the grid system that you're creating for the dungeon. So for the most part, with a game like Dungeons & Dragons, where it really doesn't matter if you add a couple of squares here or there. For example, in terms of gameplay, it doesn't matter if this room is a 4 by 6 versus, even smaller, a 3 by 4 or a 6 by 7. It really doesn't matter in terms of gameplay because the game isn't tactical enough to really make a difference that way. But in other games where really the squares do matter or count, then this is going to be a problem. And so this first characteristic that we're going to look at with these different systems is to ask the question, how accurate can they reproduce maps like this? So the ultimate test that I have for recreating a board where preservation of the grid is really important is the Hero Quest map. Because this is a game where it really matters how many spaces there are, because you're rolling to see how many spaces you can move. So this game, it's super important to be able to recreate exactly what you see here in terms of this grid, and you can't have walls be adding or subtracting number of spaces. Let's go ahead and take a look at each one of the systems and see how well we can recreate this section right here, because that's going to tell you how accurate they can be. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look with using the wall on tile system with drag and lock. And what you can see here is I am able to do a 2x3 room right here. And that is because for the most part we have the walls actually on the outside of these tiles. Here on the other side I do have another actually 4x2, because again these walls are connected and this is dead space here, and I could have used a corner piece to block off this section, but then I wouldn't have been able to put a door in right here on this side. So I am limited with where I can fit doors with this tight of a configuration. And there's a couple of spots where having these walls increases the hallways. So first off, we see here that it should be 4 spaces from this corner up to this corridor. And instead what we have, the best we can do is 5 spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just because we have the addition of these 2 squares for the sake of the walls. Even coming down the corridor, it should be the span of 4 squares across, and what we see instead is that it is 6 squares across. And the room up here, which is supposed to be 4 squares across again, that is going to be 5 squares wide. So you do run into a lot of limitations with just having these base 2x2 square pieces and where you can place the wall. So there's always going to be distortion. And as this map is being played out even more, for example, this room is going to be skewed because of the number of spaces, because right now it should only be 5 spaces across. Right now this is 5 spaces right here, so there should be a wall here, but that makes this hallway here supposed to turn right now, right around this corner, but again, it's not going to be symmetrical like it is here on this map. So a lot of limitations with using these, especially when you're stuck with a 4x4. Now with some of the other ones, you can get single space tiles. So I know that both OpenForge and Printable Scenery has 1 tile sections. I don't think Drag and Lock does. So you're stuck with these 4x4s. And so let's go ahead and take a look. I don't have all of the tiles for OpenForge or for Printable Scenery, but I do have my homemade plaster tile set that will show you some of the differences. So let's go ahead and look at that. So here, because we are able to have separate tiles, 1x1 tiles, 1x2 tiles, it's going to be a little bit easier to build out, but we're still running into some of the same problems with these walls taking up an entire space by themselves. So in this circumstance, we do have true 2x3 rooms as reflected here, but again, rather than this being 4 wide, this up here is 5 wide, exactly the same as the drag and lock system. And as well, I think this is 5 down here too. And going from here to here should be 5 blocks to the end of these rooms, but instead is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's 8 steps or 8 squares away. So it is adding a lot more because you have 3 rows that are added because of the wall system. So it's not going to be that accurate. So the interesting thing with Printable Scenery's Rampage system is that their walls, because they do clip on the end like this, they're not actually sitting on the tile. You're not wasting a whole tile with space. And what they're providing is this piece here, which is only the width, the 1/2 inch width of the wall. And so instead of it taking a whole nother inch tile to go across here, they provide a 1/2 inch spacer. And I think this is better than them taking up a whole inch, because you know when you're moving your miniatures around or tactically that you ignore this space, because this is readily distinguishable from all these other spaces. And so it's easy enough when you're moving, so 5 spaces, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? You just ignore the little piece. And so I think it mitigates some of the problem of the wall taking up room, but I still think it's going to be quite a challenge to recreate, again, this whole section here, even with the spacer, because you're going to have a spacer here, a spacer here, here, and there's a lot of spacers that are going to go in. Anywhere where there's a wall or a corner, you're going to have a spacer. So it will be doable, but you're still going to be challenged to recreate exactly this map with this kind of system. The other thing that I don't like about this is that, at least in the free starter pack, you can't clip these end pieces. There's no clips here. And so that makes it a challenge to actually make the kind of dungeons hold together the way that you want it to. I do know that OpenForge does have really modular and customizable pieces that are just a square wide. I also think that they might have spacers too. I'm not entirely sure. DragonLock also has a version where you can clip on just the walls on the outside, and they do have one spacer, but I don't know if they have a single 1/2 inch by 1 inch spacer like Printable Scenery does. So it's going to be pretty complex if you're going to be using that spacer. So let's go ahead and take a look at one of the alternatives where the actual grid is maintained. So if you look here, this grid up here is 6 across, and when you go out into the hallway, it's still 6 across because this wall is not taking up an entire additional square. And the way that they get away with this is because these are not 1 inch squares, but are 1 1/4 inches. And the width of the walls is only 1/4 inch. And so that way, miniatures can still occupy that corner space because it's still 1 inch by inch, right? And then these are 1 1/4 inches. So this is an ingenious system from True Tiles, which I think really works well in terms of getting the spaces right, because all of these wall spaces, you still have 1 inch width to get most of your miniatures. Now, unfortunately, I didn't buy the other set to be able to show you the single pieces that you need in order to make these hallways and whatnot. So I only have the pieces that are 2x2 here. But theoretically, I do think that this system, True Tiles, can recreate accurately this whole map and this section, because the walls technically aren't adding any spaces. So I do think that True Tiles can recreate complicated rooms that are right next to each other with these really thin walls fairly accurately. So with Dragon's Rest, what you have going on is that these are even larger than the 1 1/4 inch tiles from True Tiles. These are 1 1/2 inch by 1 1/2 inch. So they're the largest. So here, and these walls take up a little bit more than 1/4 inch thick. And so if you look here, the walls take up this section, and you still have an entire inch width right here. So even in the corners, you have 1 inch by inch where the model can still stand there. And then in the hallway, this is a full 1 1/2 inch wide grid. So the grid is, if you look down, the grid is protected. You're not adding any additional squares with the walls. And because of that, I can do a 2x3, just like this, and you preserve up here the 4 squares. I don't have a wall here. There should be a wall here like this. It preserves the 4 squares across here. Also, the hallway, we have 5 squares going down to the end, and then we have 4 coming down here. And then this wall is going to be preserved with 5 across, exactly the way that we see here on the map. Now, this is a little bit unfair because the designer actually made these tiles so that you could recreate this set. But I'm finding that this system is actually the system that I like in terms of being able to create accurate maps where the wall is not necessarily taking up any additional space, just like on these maps. This is a system that you can create the most accurate maps without adding additional squares because the walls are taking up that space. So if that's important to you, I think this is the best system. You have the most granularity because of these tiles being individual, and then each one of these spaces, right, can be individually changed so that you can drop a door anywhere along the wall. All right, let's go ahead and talk about the size of the tiles and the walls. And over here we have 1 inch, which is the most common tile size, as well as the height of these walls. Here we have 1 1/4 inch tiles, and then here is 1.5 inches, the largest. Obviously, you can have a lot more ground covered with the smaller inch squares, but it also is the most crowded. So look down this corridor, and for your basic miniatures, where you only have 1.5 inches of space, the smaller sort of D&D pre-painted miniatures, I think they're fine in spaces like this, although, you know, his wand is sticking out and he has to turn sideways. This Reaper miniature with this crow or whatever that is, it's a little bit big, and so it's going to feel cramped. And then finally, this guy who has a huge scythe off the side, it's going to be difficult for him to get around cramped quarters. I prefer having a little bit extra space around them, and that's why even the interior extra 1/2 inch that you get with a wall is helpful for when you want to put your miniature there. But the 1.25 inch definitely gives you more space and some more freedom, and true tiles, they have the lowest walls so that you can really have these guys hanging over the edge without any real problems, right? So this gives you the most amount of space. But I will say that I think these walls are too low, a little bit too low. Actually, I customized these before Fat Dragon came out with their own low wall set, because their low walls are only 3 bricks high. And I lowered these myself and cut them, again, see my video, to the height that I think is sort of ideal, because you want to balance the idea of having cool looking walls with actually being able to see what's in the rooms when you're across the room, because the further you are at an angle, the more stuff will be hidden, you know, back here that you won't be able to necessarily see. And so with my Dragon Lock set, I kept obviously the doors and some of the walls at the regular height, but most of the walls I'm using, the basic walls, are these shorter walls here, just so that I can see into the dungeon a little bit better. If you want to compare it to Rampage, it's about the same height here. See, it's almost exactly the same height here, as well as the floor. If I were to go the Rampage system with Printable Scenery, I would definitely get the shorter walls, and they have shorter walls available. And I actually printed this out at 125% because I wanted to see what the 1.25 inch tiles look like in comparison. And so this is 125% bigger here to the right, and it does give you a little bit more space. So again, you know, this guy can't even fit in the corner here on that inch space. But over here, you know, he has more room. He just has a little bit more wiggle room, which I like. So if I were going to do maybe a set over again, if I were to do Rampage where you have the walls right up against the edge and you don't have any wiggle room, I might actually prefer to print it at 125% just to give me a little bit more wiggle room. Now, having said that, if you compare it though to the 1.5 inch full squares here with the Dragon's Rest, you have no problems going down this corridor. And in fact, this 1.5 inch wide space here is the same width as in here. So having these walls right up against the inch space is pretty good room. Now, if this was blocked off here, where you had a wall right here, that would make it cramped again, right? Because you'd only have an inch wide narrow space for a hallway. But if you configure your dungeon to be like this, you have plenty of space going down 1 square wide spaces. Even though this takes up the most amount of space, it's going to give you the most flexibility in terms of having somewhat bigger miniatures on the board with a lot of things poking out. So it really depends on what kind of miniatures you have and how much space you're going to need. I like the height of the wall, so if you want to compare it, compare the height here. These walls are about 1/4 smaller than these, so it's very comparable to the walls that I cut out here. They're about the same height here. So I like the height of these walls, and also these walls are less than a 1/2 inch thick. I think I measured it to be 3/8 inch thick. So they're actually thinner than these chunky walls here. So it's not a 1/2 inch like it is here. And so it actually matches my homemade walls that I made with Hearst Arts. The thickness of it is very comparable. And the height is almost the same, a little bit shorter. And so in terms of providing a good looking wall, but at the same time not being too tall and obscuring the board, I do like this system here, or the shorter walls from these other systems. I do think that the True Tile walls are just, a little bit too short for my taste. But I understand why they did that, so that you can slip these doors wherever you want fairly easily. So let's talk about the different connection systems that they come with. So here with OpenForge, and then True Tiles, and Printable Scenery's Rampage system, all of them come with these open lock clips. And so these are universal, and you can actually hook these up together. The True Tiles also connect with these clips that go across the top like this, which I have right now, because I didn't want to print off the bases. But pretty much these have the same bases as all of these other systems, where you can clip them with the open lock system. This is sort of the universal system that's in play that can interlock all of these parts together. And you can switch. So I can hook these up with Printable Scenery's Rampage. And so all of this stuff is interchangeable. Dragon Lock has its own proprietary clip, which is different from this one. But you can still hook up the two systems together because they have a transition clip where one side is Dragon Lock and the other side is the open lock system. So you guys can interchange with that. The Dragon's Rest also has their own clip system, which is this piece here. And at first you might be asking, well, why didn't they go the same route and use the open lock system? And the reason is because the open lock system is too thin to accommodate a magnetic ball. Their floors are a little bit taller to accommodate that. So obviously you can use this clip to put these tiles together just in the side like this and clip these pieces together along with the walls across here. But I have magnetized all of them, and they come with a magnetic clip that is a half clip, where you take these 5mm magnetic balls and you stick it in there like this really easily. And you can put it right into these slots. And so all of these slots, especially on these wall pieces, you're going to put these magnetic clips everywhere, so that, like this over here, they all just clip on together along with the walls. And you can actually do that with any system. I use OpenForge's base that you can print separately, and I stuck them all on my Dragon Lock tiles. And again, take a look at my tutorial video and it will show you how I had to size it so that it fit. Although I think Devin Jones made separate files for each system, so the base fits them exactly. I would suggest that you can magnetize any of these systems to your heart's content. It's just that these ones are specially built to be magnetized. Now the upside to magnetizing is obviously you can clip them together really quickly and move things around and all that kind of stuff, and I can twist it around here on the board and it stays together. But the downside is you can't really pick up the dungeon, right? It sort of falls apart. And so In order to do that, the clip system actually is more superior. So this is the Dragon's Rest tiles that I've clipped together, and you can pretty much pick up the whole piece like this. So if you have a multi-tier dungeon, you might want to do that. Although you can pick these up if you place them on a board, or even I have metal sheeting that you can stick them on, and that works fine as well. But overall, I found the magnet system to be the most convenient. And out of all of these systems, the Dragon's Rest is the only one that I know of that also has magnetic walls that you can remove and replace. And obviously that's specifically for the game Hero Quest, where you don't know where the doors are until you go and explore. You need to be able to remove these individually in order to place doors. And that's why this system was built around that, so that you can place and remove these doors whenever you want, rather than having to remove the whole tile. Now, Printable Scenery did come out with a clip where you can put barrel magnets into them, but that looks like a total pain in the butt because, one, the magnets are a lot smaller in order to fit these open lock clips that are a lot flatter, and you have to keep the polarity straight where you're alternating polarity between the barrel magnets. That seems like a huge pain. I think having rotating balls is a lot easier, and so I like this system as well as Devin Jones's system, where he made it so that you just drop these magnetic balls right in these slots before you glue the top down. Another lesson learned is when you print in black PLA, not gray. Originally, when I first printed out my Dragon Lock system, I thought, oh, you know, dungeons are gray, and so I ordered a bunch of gray PLA. But when you scratch them like I did here, it really makes the light gray stand out like this. Since then, I've been printing all of my dungeons in black so that when they get scratched, you can't notice as much. So instead of gray, unless you're not going to paint them at all, then go ahead and print out in gray. But if you are going to paint, I highly suggest using black PLA instead of gray or other colors. So now I want to compare something that is admittedly completely subjective, and that is which one looks aesthetically the best. Again, this is very subjective, but in my opinion, and I'll go in order, I actually like the aesthetics of True Tiles the least because the walls, I believe, are too low. If the walls were just a little bit taller, I think it would be a lot better. And right now their line has the least amount of variety with them. And so even though I think the system is clever and how they solve the walls is really clever, aesthetically, I don't like it as much. Even these doors, even though practically they work really well, they just don't look as good as some of the other systems. So that is my least favorite in terms of looks. And then comes OpenForge. So to me, the bricks, especially the cut bricks, but even his rough stone version that he has, I don't like as much. Now, I think his end pieces look really good, but these walls seem just a little bit too clean cut and unvaried. And so that's why at the very beginning, I chose Dragon Lock walls over Devin's walls because of the aesthetic of the walls. And so even though he has the most variety, aesthetically, I don't like it as much as some of the other systems. Obviously, I really like Dragon Lock system and the variety that you get. I mean, look at all of these pieces. Now, both OpenForge and Printable Scenery do have light up LED torches. So you're going to have that cool bling happening. I do like the aesthetic. I do like the brick. And this is printed at 0.3 because when I first got my printer, I had a small printer, the FlashForge Finder, and it took forever to print out these pieces. So I just printed it at 0.3. I think now I would choose to print at 0.2 millimeter height, which is what I printed all of these other ones in, and you get finer detail. I also like the aesthetic of Printable Scenery, and their bricks are really varied. The options that you have, they have crypts, they have, I think, a Gothic wall. I would seriously consider aesthetically Printable Scenery. But I also, like I mentioned before, really do like the Dragon's Rest because it really works for me aesthetically as well. And so I think these walls look really good, and they are not a straight wall, but you have these pieces that are sticking out, and the doors I love that you can just print like this as one piece so that the doors open. These taller doors are really cool too. And then obviously all of this furniture that I made here from the Wizards store looks really cool too. And so they've come out with some really nice scenery and pieces that I think aesthetically look really cool. Obviously, you can pimp out your dungeon with all kinds of different systems and furniture and stuff like that. I'm not saying that you have to stick with one, because obviously I'm mixing and matching, but in terms of pure aesthetics, I have to say that I like Dragon Lock and I like Printable Scenery and the Dragon's Rest over True Tiles and Open Forge. So after reviewing those categories, I know that there might be other categories that we didn't hit that's more important for you. But as you look at this chart, the priority that I have to decide is really aesthetics is sort of number one. And then the accuracy. Am I able to design and build the dungeons that I want, that are reflected on the maps for D&D and other games? The other consideration that I have is I really need independent squares for the game Madara. If you haven't seen my video showcasing how I made a custom 3D board for Madara, go ahead and click here. But had I known that the Dragon's Rest system existed before I used High Grounds, I definitely would have used Dragon's Rest instead. And I will continue to use my Dragon Lock system because in terms of the ease of building sort of random dungeons, where in D&D, you know, the accuracy of the dungeons don't really matter if you have extra squares or not. It is a little bit quicker to set up sort of the dungeons using Dragon Lock instead of sort of the granularity that I can get with the Dragon's Rest tiles. So I'm glad that I'm going to have two systems, but again, if I were to choose just one, because of aesthetics and accuracy are sort of my top priorities, I would definitely go with Dragon's Rest. I do like the variety that's found in some of these other systems. Rampage, I think, if they would have come out with this system earlier, I might have gone with them instead of Dragon Lock. But at the end of the day, you're getting really similar effects and uses, and any player that's going to come over to play games with you are going to be impressed with any system that you use. So at the end of the day, I don't think you can lose with any of these systems. What are your thoughts and comments? Were there any other systems that you have invested in that I didn't touch upon or don't even know about? Please make comments below. Check out my Patreon page and see what kind of 3D printed prize that we're going to be giving away for this month. And also subscribe, because I will be showcasing my next epic build, which is going to be a dungeon. Like this video and subscribe, and we will see you next time. Happy hobbying and happy gaming.